Hey, what's up? So today we're going to talk a little bit about taxes and the Department of Government Efficiency, aka DOGE. I find it so hard to make money, to save money, and part of me can't help but think about how much tax takes away from your income. And I know it's different in different countries, different places, but it's often quite high, right? Like sometimes they're in brackets where it's like if you make a smaller income, then it's a smaller percentage. But if you go into a higher bracket, it might be a higher percentage. And I think from my understanding, and I don't know it well, but I think for most people, it's probably sitting somewhere around 30 to 50%, depending on where you are. If you're lucky, it'll be very low. I think some countries have it very low. But I would say that most people probably would feel like they're not getting their tax money's worth in value. And I might be projecting and I might be kind of passing on my own thoughts to others, but from a few conversations I've had with others, I think this is very true. You know, there are some really good things that the tax dollar pays for. I think the healthcare system is very good. I think, you know, fixing potholes, fixing things here and there, I think is good. But for sure, there are some things that probably I don't think personally is like a great spend of money, but you know, it is kind of a democracy. So there's that. If you own a home, you still have to pay rates. But yeah, I think DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, is a really good thing. I don't know if they've had this before or if it's just become more public because there's a more public figure, Elon Musk, who's been looking at it in America, or if it is a new thing. But I do think it's warranted. It's interesting because I think I saw in some kind of interview with him where he was saying that he has to be careful because there's so much corruption that you can't just take away money from certain places because it's going to upset powerful people. You know, tax does take a lot of money. I think it'd be interesting I don't know if this is already a thing, maybe I just don't know, but I think it would be good if every salary that was paid under government was made public. I think that'd be cool to see where, you know, who your money is actually going to, and if some people might be getting overpaid, that'd be quite interesting to see. But I do think it's worth revising, and one of the reasons why is inflation. Inflation is a huge topic right now, right? And quite often what comes with inflation is people's salaries might be reevaluated, might go up to kind of match inflation. And even if that wasn't there, kind of, you know, as you're working, if you're doing well, hopefully you're getting some kind of pay rise or pay review per year, performance review. And so your pay increases, but these tax brackets don't really change. The tax rates don't change. So we're all secretly paying more in tax. And I don't know if people realize what's going on. So I think it'd be cool if we could have a vote for tax dollar allocation instead of, or in addition to, electoral candidates. I don't think probably most people would know how to allocate that kind of capital, but if people were kind of presented some options and specific projects, maybe that already happens and I just, you know, I don't pay enough attention, or because I'm so distant from it, I'm only one person, that I don't know. But if that was there, that'd be quite cool. And another thing about tax is it's such an interesting thing, right? Like, I understand it from a developing country or a developing nation's point of view. You know, you kind of want to get the latest technology, you kind of want to get the latest standards, etc., etc. But at a certain point, once the country or nation is developed, I would think it would make sense to kind of be able to dial back the tax. And it's such a difficult thing to do because it's, you know, precedence, right? Like once it's set, it's so hard to revert or reverse or go back in any way. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the long-term future. But I do think at some point something radical is going to be required to kind of have to combat it, because if tax only ever goes up, I think it's going to be a problem for the general public. Certainly the low class and middle class, I think. If you look at money as well, so when you make money, when you get income, it gets taxed. And another way of looking at that is if when someone else makes money, they get taxed. So when you're spending money, it's getting taxed as well. There's also things like GST, goods and services tax. So it's just all around tax, right? And if you had three people, if you had three friends and they were just doing some kind of trading, let's say they started with $50, and then person one gives the $50 to person two for some kind of service or product. Let's say, just for example, that tax takes away $10. So now person two only receives $40 because the $10 has gone to tax. So let's say person two then gives person three the $40 for a product or service. Let's say it's $10 again. Person three now only receives $30. So let's say person three buys something from person one and they spend $30, but $10 tax goes out. So person one only receives $20, etc., etc., eventually to the point where the value has been entirely taken by tax. And so they're able to trade this product or service, but essentially all the value, not all the value, but the value is being siphoned, not siphoned, that's probably a bit harsh, but taken by tax. And so at the end of the day, it just ends up as zero, which is quite a crazy concept. It's similar in a way to a casino. If you've ever played poker at a casino, and where every hand you play, the dealer essentially takes a percentage or a small amount from the pot. And so the house always wins. It's very interesting how it's set up. And I'm sure it made sense, or it makes sense again in developing nations or developing countries. And I'm sure when it kind of was incepted, when it came to fruition, when it first came about, I'm sure it made sense. You know, somebody kind of, or a government or a power kind of looking after the rest of the village or the rest of the city. I'm sure that made a lot of sense. There is power in uniting, but I don't know if it still makes sense. Like, there are things, of course, that make sense. I don't know if it entirely makes sense. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just a little bit thoughtful about it, more thoughtful about it now. You know, it's come around to tax time, and just the fact that it's always there. Every time you make money, it's always there. Every time you spend money, it's always there. And so it's hard for it not to be something you think about when you're trying to make more money, you're trying to save more money. Yeah, I don't know. A little bit of a rant or open-ended conversation. Thanks for watching. See you next time.